And welcome to the Firebrand Pastor, the podcast where passion meets purpose as we have lively discussions about important Christian topics. And I am your host, Bill Brown, and I'm happy to be here. I will say this that unfortunately, my co host, Ben Good, is not able to be here today. So just pray for him. He's out sick today. So just pray that he'll heal up and he'll be back with us next week. But I do have with me, I'm glad that I have two guests today. That's Pastor Preston, and I'll just call you Dr. Derek. How's that? I kind of like that. So, but two very good men, men who have had a lot of experience in ministry. And of course, Preston being a pastor, Preston and I had a little bit of a chance to talk beforehand. And we've been put through our paces as far as being pastors. And of course, Derek, you are a pastor as well. You are actually also a doctor, but not a practicing physician, obviously.
Right.
You are what is your doctorate in?
I have a PhD in systematic theology from the Southern
Systematic
Baptist
theology.
Theological Seminary.
Okay, that's what I thought it was, but I was going by memory, and
Yeah.
I don't trust my memory. So, anyway, it's great to have both of you gentlemen on today, and we are discussing the topic of special needs children in the ministry. Huge topic. Simply because, for whatever reason, it isn't. It seems like topics like this are not discussed in churches today. Not all churches are that way, obviously, but what we found, just to kind of give you a little bit of a background to where I'm coming from on this, and the reason why we chose this topic for today, we found that we had quite a few special needs kids in our church, and it's really interesting because we had a church of at the time maybe 60 people. On a good Sunday, we would have 40 to 45, so not very many. And we ended up having two special needs children with extraordinary needs in our church. And we got to talking to these families, and their statement was, "We love your church. We love your church because they accept all of us. They accept our special needs children." And that has not been the case in some of the churches that we have visited. And that shocked me because I thought, what better place to accept someone, anyone, right? Anyone who is in their church, to accept them, regardless of what condition they are in physically. In a situation like that, to me, it seems tragic. And really, I think we need to bring awareness to special needs children because it is important to know that God loves everyone, even everyone He has created, even those who He has created with special needs. In fact, Scripture tells us that, makes it very clear that that is true. So let's go ahead and broach that topic. Let me just ask. Let's start with Preston. Let me ask you, what is your story with special needs kids? Because you're very passionate about this subject. So, what is your story? Uh-oh. Preston, I can't hear you. Do you have your mic muted? Oh, that's interesting. Derek, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But I couldn't hear Preston.
Yeah, I can't hear Preston either. Well, tell you what, Preston, we'll start with Derek. Okay, hey, anticlimactic, but that's okay. We'll start with Derek. And hey, Derek, give us your story regarding special needs.
Yeah, so my wife and I desired to have children shortly after we were married and found out about a year into that process that we were unable to conceive biologically. And so thankfully we were in a church where we were out in Kentucky, and we were at a church that had a very strong adoption culture already, had several international adoptions had already occurred, and had cute little kids running around that church who were adopted from overseas. And so in God's grace, he just led us directly to adopt. And we adopted first from Ethiopia, but then second, we adopted from China's special needs program. And when we first started that process, we had decided, because of the position we were in financially, we were relatively newly married, we're in seminary, and so we're not making a lot of money. We were fine, but we weren't making a lot of money. We decided we probably couldn't handle it, wouldn't be wise to take on a significant medical need. And so we decided that we kind of draw the parameters around our application about what needs we thought we would be able to handle. And so we did that, and then we were pretty quickly recommended, or had a child matched to us who had what they called developmental delays. Okay. And the lady who was working with us with our agency said, this is a pretty clean record. Overall, things looked really good. That all they knew is that he had a developmental delay. He was 2.5, and everything looks great. And so we were very excited. My wife had grown up in the Bay Area. She always had kind of dreams of even adopting from China. So this was a neat thing. We were excited. And so fast forward, we fly over to China to pick him up. And the moment we met him, we knew that there was more than mere developmental delays going on, whatever that could mean. I mean, that could mean a lot of things, but we could tell right away his vision was exceedingly poor. And there were just other kinds of features about him and his personality that made us think there's more going on here. But sweet, cute little guy. We were so happy to be parents now of 2 boys. And so we did the whole process there. We were in China in about 16 days or 18 days, something like that, and then brought him home. And from that point on, as he got older and he wasn't hitting milestones that you would typically find in what we would say a normal child, even though I use that word lightly, but he wasn't hitting those normal milestones, and his ability to speak wasn't hitting the certain milestones, and his physical coordination wasn't hitting milestones, and his potty training wasn't hitting milestones. So we started to realize that his special needs are more significant than we anticipated. And fast forward even further, we took him into a developmental pediatrician who diagnosed him as having autism. Now, I use that word to help people kind of categorize our son, to help them understand like why he behaves the way he does. Although I think that word actually is a little unhelpful because of how broad autism is defined. Yes. But I just use it to help people to kind of get a category for them. But if you were to meet him, you would find a 13-year-old young man who has the social and verbal capacities of about a 3 or 4-year-old. That's probably where you'd peg him. You're like, this is kind of like talking to a 3 or 4-year-old. Okay. Lots of repetitive questions, inability to go very deep in any kind of conversation, behavioral issues that where he will act out, and these kinds of things that have become more difficult as he's grown older. And these kinds of issues that come along with this kind of diagnosis. And so that's been our background. It's been in our family since 2014. And the Lord has been good. He has taught my wife and I, sanctified my wife and I, and our other 2 kids. We have a older son and a younger daughter. Sanctified them, helped them to understand how to be compassionate towards those who are lowly. And but also at the same time, at our church, we've had such a wonderful church come around and surround our family. And church is one of his best places because he has so many people who love him, who tolerate his questions, who he'll go and grab their hand and hug them. And it's just, our whole church loves him, and it's a very safe and wonderful place for him. And then my wife has also been part of, because of her love for now, this special love that God has put in her heart for special needs kids. She's also helped create a special needs program for our church to help families who come in, like you had mentioned, who, is there a place for our child? He'll blurt out during the service, or he'll be loud, or he's hard to talk to, or hard to understand, or these kinds of things. And we're like, yes, now we're set up to help you with that. And so she was part of putting all that together. And I've seen it in myself and my wife and my other two kids, that we're just more aware now of people with special needs. I would say that we have, thankfully now, more compassion for those, the people themselves and the parents. And this is all due to God's grace and working in our lives in doing this, even though I would say the last 11 years have been exceedingly challenging for our family in managing a child who has a significant special needs. But even then, he can talk. He is now potty trained and these kinds of things. He is going to school. And so there are these elements where I'm thinking, I know of other families who have it much more difficult. So we're grateful for how the Lord has cared for us and our family. But that's our story, and why we care so much about this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Pastor Preston, is your mic working?
You tell me.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
working.
it's
All right.
working.
Okay.
Okay, so what's your story?
Well, wow, that's a big question. I was a social worker. I was bivocational, and I was a social worker. And so my introduction into this entire world of children with disabilities, adults with disabilities, was really as a social worker in Tennessee, and then later in Texas, where I pastored. And then we have our own child. Our sixth child is named Phoebe, and Phoebe is a person with Down syndrome. So we have prenatal diagnoses, and in Texas, by law, the doctors have to tell you what your options are.
Mm.
And the doctor graciously said, "Well, you have 1 week to make a decision, because the threshold for abortion was at 20 weeks. We were at 19."
Mm.
And so he told us what our options were, and he said, "Go home, pray about it." And we didn't go home and pray about it. We told him right there on the spot, this is our decision. We are going to see this child come full term, and we are going to love this child, and God's going to use this child to teach us something. And that was 10 years ago, and here we are. God has radically transformed our family because of Down syndrome. And now I serve at a church in Pennsylvania that does a Night to Shine event for people with disabilities. And so I get to be part of seeing the bigger picture. And so I got a lot of connecting points with disability. And I would talk about our older son, but it's a little too raw and fresh for me to talk about that. But
Yeah,
he is 22 years old, and he has a mental disorder that is not obvious. But so my experience is vast. I've been doing a lot of reading the last 2 years on theology of disability, and gone to a conference on that as well. Unfortunately, most of our evangelical culture, our Sunday service is a consumable good or a consumable product, and we haven't really figured out how to make space and create a safe place for people with disabilities in a lot of our evangelical churches, and I would include the church that I pastor in that. We do Night to Shine, but we don't really have a strong connection in the disability community, which is the most neglected community in our country when it comes to ministry.
Yeah, and I would concur with that, just from the feedback that I've gotten. And obviously, my story is not nearly as in depth as you gentlemen's story, but I started out as a teacher, a school teacher in a small Christian school in Ohio. And that was an interesting experience on a number of levels. We were talking about doing podcast subjects we could do whole podcasts on. That would be would be one of them, Christian education. But interesting dynamic, because the public schools, I don't know. I'm living in California now. I'm not sure. I haven't had a lot of experience with the public schools here. A little bit with some foster kids that we had, but back in Ohio, pretty much if there was any issue, if there was any kind of quote unquote disability or special need or whatever they called it at the time, they would pretty much just put them in special education, whether the parent wanted it or not. And so what ended up happening was we had an influx of special needs kids on one level or another. Some of them were just, they were interesting. They had quirks about them, and they were wonderful kids. Loved them to death, but they were a little bit different. But for whatever reason, they were labeled, and so in the public school system, they weren't allowed to achieve and succeed. So the parents would send them to our school, and we had some that were a little bit more than just that, where they couldn't even take a test because they just struggled so much with processing. And so I had a chance to have to negotiate situations like that with students, which is a little bit different than parenting, granted, but it got my feet wet because it wasn't just me, it was the administration. Everyone was so patient, so caring, and I thought this is the way that it should be done. This is the way that special needs kids should be treated. They shouldn't be treated different in the sense of being human beings, but they have special needs. So obviously, we're going to treat them a little bit different on one level or another. But it just those kids, they loved it there. They stayed in the school for years because they felt like they belonged to that school, whereas in public school, not so much. So that's a little bit of my story. And I've had some other experiences, obviously as pastor, and even as a parent of kids that came out of the foster care system. But all of that to say, this is such an important and interesting subject for us to broach, because the church sometimes does struggle with these types of things, and it's wonderful to know, Derek, that your wife has created a special needs program. That is my wife. My wife and your wife will have to compare notes, because my wife, that's one of her dreams, is to be able to
Hmm.
do something like that when we get into our new building, because our building was burned down in the Caldor fire, and so we're still trying to rebuild that. But we're trying to make we're trying to create an atmosphere there, with the physical building itself, and obviously with some of the ministries we have, because we do have, even now we have special needs kids
Yeah.
in our church. So I think my wife would absolutely adore your wife, because that's one of her dreams, is to
Hmm.
do that.
Hmm.
But anyway, all that to say, let me just ask you this. Um, just on a personal note, before we get into the ministry aspect of this, because I'm guessing you probably have a unique perspective on ministry because of your unique experiences as parents. But let me just ask you this on a personal note: if we were to pray for your family, so me as someone who currently does not have a special needs child, I don't necessarily relate to you. How could I pray for your family, for your ministry? What would be your most ardent request if I were to ask you, what should I pray for? Let's start with Preston.
Hmm.
I tried to drag the question out as long as I could.
Yeah, you were dragging it. uh,
We can go to Derek.
one of the things that I just continue to try to do before God and before His people is just maintain vulnerability, and
Mhm.
I think um, just being vulnerable with our congregation about the difficulties of life and the challenges that we
Mhm.
face. It's not like we, as a family with a disabled child or whatnot, that we're not asking for people to do anything, but we do want to create a culture in the church where we value people that have various diagnoses, and then create a space for them. And so my prayer is not really as a family. My prayer is really as a church, that we
Right.
begin to value and invest in areas where this part of our society
Mhm.
has hospitality in the church for them. So hospitality might be a short way to say it.
Sure. Oh, yeah, perfect. Great answer. Yeah, thank you for that. Derek, what would be your request if I were to walk up to you and ask you, what can I pray for in
Yeah,
regard to?
anytime anybody asks me how they can pray for my family, the first thing I say, anytime you think of our family, think of our children, think of their salvation and pray for them. I have a
Yes.
14-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old, and you know, they wouldn't. I don't think any of. I think all of them would say, if you ask them, "Are you a Christian?" They'd say yes. Have they been born again? I'm not sure. Um, but that's first and foremost, always in my heart. Even for, I've had conversations with people who will say things like, "Well, you know, don't worry about that with your regard to your special needs child." And I always say, "Listen, I'm gonna assume
Yes.
that he can understand. I'm going to assume that he can experience the forgiveness of sins, and I'm going to assume that he can be born again, that he needs to, and I'm not going to assume on the other side." We share the gospel with him regularly. He can tell you that Jesus died on the cross for his sins and so on. But that's what we long for our kids, for their salvation. And we understand too. We had a young man. He was in his 40s when he was at our church. He had Down syndrome, and we knew his family, and he he was a believer, and his parents say there was a marked difference when he came to
Mm,
Christ. Before, he was angry, he was mean, even though Downs people typically are not this way. There was angst, there was this sort of, and there was a marked change when he came to Christ. He had a love for Christ, he had a patient spirit, he had a love for God's people, he had a love for worship. There's just all these fruit, and it changed his overall demeanor and behavior, and a lot of the problems that they were having kind of went away. um, and he had a little ministry at the church, and he had a little job, and he loved his family, and he was a sweet young man. And uh, and so when I think of my son, I understand that some of the difficulties that we have are difficulties due to his special needs. And but there are also difficulties that we have due to the fact that he is not regenerate, that he's a sinner who doesn't have the power over sin yet. And so we desire for that to happen. We understand that if that change were to happen, that would also bring about some other significant changes in his life. And so we are just always asking for that for all three of our children, and to not count out our Easton, because he has special needs. And so I think that's probably, I do like what Preston said about just vulnerability, being open. Our son had a huge, huge meltdown a few weeks ago at Good Friday service. Thankfully, I wasn't preaching, um, but it was so bad. I mean, it was just, and so I had to get him outside and so on. And it's times like then that the Lord doesn't allow you to hide. You have to be very vulnerable. Like, listen, this is a struggle that we have. It's very out in the open, and that we could just actually help people with that. Like, listen, we all have struggles. Let's not try to hide them. Let's bring them to the body of Christ, and get help from each other. And thankfully, right after that episode, a friend of mine texted me, said, "Hey, Derek, saw what happened. We love you. We love your family. We love Easton." And that was just awesome, right? And so we're grateful for our church, but we also too want to be willing to say, "Hey, this is us, and these are the things we do," so that it'll be a comfort and a help to other families. And sometimes that's hard, because sometimes it's just frankly embarrassing. So we just need continued grace in that area.
absolutely. And you answered my second question, or my next question, rather. So I'll turn this over to Preston. As far as spiritual needs, is there anything that you do any different with your special needs child that you would with you would do with another child, or is pretty much like what Derek said, preach them the gospel, just like anyone else?
Yeah, and there may be a few things different, in not in content, but in repetition.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
I think with Phoebe, we don't know the ceiling of her cognitive ability.
Mhm.
Right.
Uh, we see progress. Uh, she's got a wonderful program and 10 teachers and aides at school, but we don't know, and so we assume that uh, the habits and the rhythms of our home are extremely important to her. That I pray over her at night. I mean, when we put her to bed, I pray, and I pray very simple prayers, and it's always the same thing, so that the repetition just continues to flood her mind. Um,
Yes.
sing music's a big part of her life. Dancing is a big part of her life, and so we're careful about the songs that we allow her to sing. Um, she's involved in a children's program at church, so I
Mhm.
don't know that I've done anything different with her that I did with my other kids.
Mhm.
But I know that I know that we have slowed down.
Right.
Like
Mhm.
her life slows us down in so many ways, and that that's just been a beautiful thing for us
Yeah.
because now
Mm.
we can. She's taught us how to celebrate little things like going poop in the potty
Mhm. Right. Yeah.
and putting sprinkles in there to flush it.
Right.
And we're like, well,
Sure.
I
Why
take
not?
that for granted. I took that for granted for a long time, and so
Yeah. Yeah.
for her, it's a victory, and so we get to celebrate victories that we didn't celebrate with our other kids because
Yeah.
we wanted them to hurry up and not be inconvenient for us.
Mhm.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the way that I look at it is, a special needs child. They have special needs. Obviously, that's the reason why we give that title. But special needs children are children, and children of of any situation are in different levels. Some learn faster than others. Some learn at different ways, different learning styles, or what have you. And so I was just curious as to whether or not you had, if there was any kind of secret sauce there as far as dealing with your children. But Derek, I'll just share something that you shared with us in one of our classes regarding this, and you were uh, you were very adamant to say that you don't know what they understand.
Mhm.
God knows, obviously, and God is good. He's just. He's merciful, and so to just give them the gospel and give them what they need and give them spiritually what will nourish them and leave it up to God is that beautiful connection between our responsibility and God's sovereignty, even in the lives of special needs children. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
so let's shift gears a little bit. Let's go to the ministry. How and Derek, you already shared that your son sometimes has meltdowns. How has your own situation affected your personal ministry? I mean, are there other ways, Derek, that your son being special needs, I would even say in a positive way, where it gives you a different perspective on special needs children? How has that affected your ministry overall?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I do see in my own life and in Amy's life, there's been a development of compassion towards just people with special needs in general. You see kids who you just know it right away now. You see it and you're like, oh, and you want to go over and you want to talk to the parent, you want to encourage them and serve them in however way you can. And I just don't think that would have happened if unless we had our son. And so the Lord's kind of expanded our widened our hearts, I think you could say, in that regard. And that's been good. And I think especially too with having compassion on the child, but also with the parents, and you know what they're going through now, and you want to encourage them. So he's helped us in that way. He has, like I've mentioned before, like our church has just opened their heart wide to our kids, our family, and to him especially. And we see the importance of the local church just again and again, and that's a just it's a such a vital place for him. and so that's been great. In terms of my personal ministry, having opportunities to do this kind of thing, having opportunities to talk in informal ways about how ministry meets special needs and how theology meets special needs.
Yes.
Of course, those have been opportunities that the Lord has afforded. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how, and I think Preston even mentioned this, like Easton slows our life down quite a bit. In fact, my wife has been, she has even grieved in the ways it has changed what she thought parenting would be like. Sometimes the four of them can't go to the store together because it just won't work, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
And so those kinds of things, they can't go out on a field trip together because of how it would go. And so those things there's been limitations put on us. And in the same way, there's been limitations put on my ministry. I would love to be able to travel more overseas and do some missions work that our church is involved with here. I choose not to leave the home for longer than 3 days at a time. So I'll go do retreats that are nearby if I've been asked to do that. But I won't leave longer than 3 days because it just won't work for the family. And won't work for Easton, quite honestly. He really needs me at home. Yes. And he is it really brings peace of mind for him, and you can see it. So, but you know what? We're not upset or angry about these limitations. We actually look at it now and we're like, this is God's wisdom in our life, honestly. Yes. To keep me near home, to keep us closer together as a family, to help us value the small things. One thing that we love about our boy is he has very simple taste. He loves the small things of life, and that's taught us and helped us. And even having said all that, the Lord has afforded me just wonderful ministry opportunities. So just in God's sovereignty, we see him as just his wisdom and how he's formed our family, even as it regards our various ministries, even though there's times we wish we could do more, and there's other things we wish we could do. My wife is the same. She's very active in our church, like I said, with the special needs ministry and with women's ministry and discipleship and on and on. And she would like to do more of that, and Easton challenges it. And we're actually grateful for that. We think that's God's wisdom in our life to slow us down, to deepen us, and to keep me closer to home. I think that's been wise for various reasons. So there's the expanding and the limiting, both of which have been great in our lives.
Okay, very good. How about you, Preston? How has this affected your personal ministry as far as having a special needs child?
Well, it's definitely given me a lot more to talk about in the pulpit can be both humorous and very sobering at the same time. It's funny, people ask me about my education, and I give them the answers they want to hear, but I'm quick to divert their attention not to formal education, but to my greatest education really has been the last 10 years of my life with a child with disability and 8 years in social work. What I learned through these things and continue to learn is invaluable. And so I just teach from a lot of that perspective, experiential knowledge versus book knowledge and theology. I mean, it all melts together, hopefully. But the challenge to be able to articulate it in a way that is more accessible for people in front of me. I tell my kids all the time, I said, formal training can prepare you for a lot of things, but communicating with everyday people is really a hard thing to do. It's a challenge when you speak a different language than they do. You have to figure out how to make it accessible. As I say, put the cookies on the bottom shelf. So that disability has really challenged me to be able to speak simpler and slower. I'm from the South anyway, so I talk slow. And I repeat myself. I'll say something 5 times. I'll say it 5 different ways, but I've said the same thing.
Yeah.
So just finding out how it connects to people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's okay. I went to college at Pensacola, Florida, which most of Florida is not the South, but the
Hmm.
Panhandle is because it's like right next to Alabama. So
Okay.
love my friends from Alabama. They were great people. But anyway, so if there are are there specific principles that you could give us? So let's say let's just make a hypothetical situation here and say that you're going to a church. What would you expect from that church as far as special needs? What would they be if you could ask for anything from a church regarding how they interact with special needs children? What would that be? Let's start with Derek.
Yeah, I think you need. I mean, first and foremost, you need patience. Underlying all of this is you see that child is made in the image of God. I mean, you
Mhm.
want to. So much of this depends upon a sound theology of the human person, and that child is made in the image of God.
Yes.
God talks about them specifically. I would say that you classify them in Romans 12 when Paul says associate with the lowly. I think these are the lowly, at least part of that group. And so God has a special heart for weakness. He glorifies himself through weakness. He has a special heart for the vulnerable, and so these are people that God particularly cares for. And so I think all that's underlying, this but I think when on a practical level, when you come across a special needs child, um, compassion, patience is so key.
Yes.
Patience with how they act, they behave, how they, in my case, ask repetitive questions over and over and over and over and over, and even after you've answered them over and over and over, and seeing that they're made in the image of God and they have weaknesses, just like we have weaknesses, right? We're just on a spectrum of strengths and weaknesses when it comes down to it, right? And they have some significant weaknesses like we do, and I think grace and compassion, even humility, goes a long way, and just being willing to just kind of go along with them and talk to them and engage with them, not to be afraid of them, and not to become annoyed. I mean, it's so easy to become annoyed, I think, with special needs kids. They're loud. And I'm not even talking about there's genuine unruliness that one needs to deal with, even with special needs children. You do need to deal with unruliness and disobedience and this kind of thing. But when it just comes to their children and they have special needs, and that's going to create some awkwardness, just like try not to be annoyed and try to just love them and to delight in them. And because when my wife and I find that when we're doing that, things are just a lot easier all around. And we found a number of our people at our church, as they've just accepted Easton and embraced him, that they do delight in him, and they tell us that there's plenty to delight in, despite the difficulties. So I think those are a few things. Just compassion, humility, patience is huge, and finding a way to delight in them.
Yeah, one of my favorite verses on this topic in Scripture is Exodus 4:11, where God says, "Who has made man's mouth?
Mm-hmm.
Who made the deaf? Who made those who can't speak? Isn't I the Lord?"
Yeah.
And I just love that verse because it emphasizes that very important idea that even people with special needs, they are stamped with the image of God
Yeah.
and made in the image of God, and it's an awesome thing to consider when you're ministering to people because face it, anytime that we are interacting with certain people, right? Because we know, okay, this person has a temper, so we're going to
Mm-hmm.
be really careful around them, how we talk to them, or this person gets easily hurt, and so we're going to be really careful the way that we speak around them because we don't want to be a stumbling block. It's just adapting to that situation.
Mm.
So yeah, absolutely. So Preston, what do you think? What would be if you were to have a wish list that you could give to any church regarding special needs children? What would that be?
Well, if you want, I would just simply throw out a challenge to the local churches. If you want to grow and mature and become more like Christ, or another way to say it, if you want to be a disciple and grow in discipleship, a very elusive term for us, then you have to serve other people. And if you really want to discover who you really are, go serve people who can't pay you back.
Right.
And Jesus had this funny phrase, and I don't understand a lot of things Jesus said sometimes. He said, "The poor you will always have with you," meaning the needy you will always have with you. And so I think that for the church to really test its maturity, or for a person to test their maturity, give them the opportunity to go and serve a group of people who can't even thank them or make them feel appreciated. Um, I'll say it this way: the disabled people need the help of the abled people. And I use the word disabled in quotes, and I use the word able people in quotes, because I look at myself and I think I am an able-bodied person, and in many ways I am. But I just have learned how to cover up my fallenness a lot better because of my ability.
Mhm.
My child, on the other hand, will probably never learn to cover up their fallenness because of her disability.
Right.
So I can use work, I can use wealth, I can use willpower I can use all three of those things to cover up, to mask my need, or to run from help, to just think I don't need help. But the bottom line is we all need help, and we're all fallen, and we all use something to hide behind. Whereas the disabled people, they don't have anything to hide behind.
Right.
They just don't have the same tools that able-bodied people have to hide behind. So I think the act of serving and helping those who are weak and needy is where we discovered that as able-bodied people, we too are weak and needy.
Yes.
And that's where the opportunity is in front of everybody in the church.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because in Scripture we're described as being, among other things, obviously, spiritually dead, but we're also described as being spiritually blind, which some would consider a disability or a special need. God, God has that special place in His heart for those who have special needs, and it is so important to be able to meet those. And so, my next question is to you, Derek. You talked about your wife starting a special needs program in the church. What does that look like? What kind of ministries can a church have to meet the needs better of a special needs person?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, you need people, because people are the ones who are going to be doing the ministry. And so we have buddies, that's what we call them. It started actually years ago when we realized that, I had told you that church is one of the best places for Easton. Years ago, it used to be one of the worst. He hated going to church, just hated it. And it was very hard. I mean, I'm a pastor, right? And Amy's trying to get our kids to go to church, and it's just like pulling teeth to get him there. And so she thought, hey, you know what we could do is we could create a buddy system for him, where he has a couple of adults who are willing to give up the whole Sunday, because it takes that, you got to be on him the whole time, who would be there at the 9 o'clock hour. They're going to be with him. They're going to play with him. They're going to try to do a little lesson with him. And then they're going to sit with him during the worship service and make sure that he has what he needs to, he's got a Rubik's Cube, or he's got something to draw on, or whatever it might be. And they're going to take care of him, because Amy needs to be able to care for the other two, plus do her responsibilities. And I got to be completely freed up. And so she started with these buddies. This is years ago. And then eventually we moved into, or we're in a facility now where we have more space. And then we started having more special needs people showing up. And that's where Amy's like, I think this needs to happen. And actually, one of our pastors said they think this needs to happen. And so what she did is she's okay, we need to find more buddies, basically. And so we started asking more people and creating a list. And so now we have buddies for one of our special needs young man. He's in his 20s who's completely confined to a wheelchair. And so someone has to be taking care of him all morning long. And that's what they do. We have a special needs room where kids can go. Like we just had a child who had a really busy day on Monday, come to Sunday, super worn out and going to have a meltdown right in the middle of service. We need to take him into the special needs room. He can go sit on the beanbag. He can go do Century, whatever it is. And that was great for him. And then we have another one who is similar to our Easton, though not as verbal. And he always, when they come, they're not always able to come, but when they do come, he'll have a buddy assigned to him to take him to Bible class, to take him back to service and these kinds of things. So it's really people centric in that sense, that what matters is having the people come alongside the families and the kids to help them throughout navigate the Sunday. And plus we have a room then that is, if all else fails, you can go to the room and you can be at rest there, and it's a peaceful, quiet place, and it's cool, and it's not sensory overload at all, and but there are things there for them to do, and plus they the helpers can go in and sit there and actually can listen to the message there. We have it on a screen. So that's what we've done. But I would just say, yeah, it starts with the people, and it starts with people wanting to be part of this ministry. And thankfully we found people who are great, and they desire, and they do just a great job, and they're very compassionate and kind. And so, but that's the basic. It's not, I've been to other churches where they have a big, huge program and it's just amazing. And that's not us. We've just done what we need to do as the need arises. And we have a few families, including ours, that have special needs, and we try to minister to them. So.
Absolutely. Very good. How about you, Preston? As far as ministries are concerned, specific ministries, what would a church ministry to those who have special needs look like?
Yeah, I appreciate Derek's thoughts about that, because I think the buddy system is really we use that with Night to Shine, but it's really this idea that somebody volunteers to give themselves literally to this person, this child or this adult. And, really it's just the incarnation of what Jesus did for us.
Yes.
That we're giving ourselves away to someone who is weak and needy, or someone who may not even be able to reciprocate anything. So, we don't have a formalized or an organized program in our church right now. We've had conversations about it since our family arrived, which was about 2.5 years ago. There's a need for it. We have a tremendous population, people with disabilities. We do have probably half a dozen that attend our church. I have vision, I have a dream about it, but that's pretty much still in the cloud. So
yeah, certainly. Yeah. Do you feel comfortable sharing your dream?
Well, the dream would be that more people would deny themselves, and take up their ability, and serve. It's just we live in a very we don't live in a time where volunteerism is at an all-time high. We just don't.
No.
So it's hard to find people who will commit to a vision that requires them to deny themselves. The Western church is largely influenced by a consumer approach to Sunday morning and whatever. And so I have to find the healthy balance in talking about these things without insulting people or somehow hurting people's feelings, which so I fail at that sometimes. So I'm easily misunderstood because I have this face that doesn't smile a lot. I look like I'm a military officer, and I'm not. I'm just a big crybaby, to be honest with you, if anybody knows me. But I don't. We're not doing anything right now that I can say is is marketable or repeatable, or we can hand off to some other church. So
Yeah. Yeah. To your point, I think COVID-19 changed a lot of those dynamics too. Whereas beforehand, people would get close to each other and there was that intimate contact. It's almost like, we haven't seen it so much in our church because we're backwoods. But I know others have told me that, one of the issues with people showing up and actually volunteering for things like this is they're just running scared. And I know not every church is that way, but certainly by and large, our culture was changed through that. So I would guess, I mean, have you seen that affect your special needs program or how people interact with special needs kids at all? Either one of you?
Yeah, that's a challenging question, I think, because you're right. Something did seem to change at COVID, but in our case, we've seen. We're just so grateful for how people have stepped up to our request. Now, if you were to look at, we as elders, we keep very close track of where people are serving because we want to encourage. We want all people to be serving, and when they're not, we approach them and encourage them to find a place to serve. But so we still have gaps, and we would wish that more people would serve. But having said that, we've just been very encouraged by how people have post-COVID served, and especially in this area and in others. So our experience has been positive coming out of COVID, thankfully. And so I don't know if I'm the best representative in that case. Of course, we still have struggles where not everybody is picking up their cross and following after Jesus and serving others and
that seems to be generally true.
Yeah, right. But again, we're just pleased and grateful for how some have, and it really has been neat to see people. I think it does affect people in a unique way. I think similar to what Preston's saying, when you have to serve someone who can't give you really any benefit at all, except for all that you get is the joy of serving Christ by serving this person. That's all you get. And to find people like realizing that's all I need, actually, that's satisfying. That's when I am satisfied in the Lord, I can. And so it's been neat to see that when people step into this ministry, they are blessed in a significant way, and it just bleeds over into other things. So we're just grateful. And honestly, I'm grateful for my wife. She's really been the one the trailblazer in all of this, and done a great job. But we'll say this, that every time she's creating the schedule for the buddies, she's like, we need more buddies. We need more buddies.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's always been an issue, even pre-COVID. That's always been an issue to try to find people who are willing to step into a role like that, into a ministry or any ministry, but especially one where it's not just a physical drain; it's emotional in a lot of ways too, because you're dealing with children with special needs, and there is that emotional connection that you make with those young people. I know just the limited exposure that I had being a teacher and having a connection to those kids. I think I was probably closest to the special needs kids, closer to the special needs kids than I was any of the other kids, just because I spent so much time with them because they just required more time and they were much needier. So yeah, definitely. But just a real quick story here as we close everything up here. But we right after the Caldor fire, we ended up at another church, and we opted not to do our own services. So we just combined churches. It was actually our sister church, the church that started Grizzly Flats Community Church. And one of our special needs kids, she loves to talk during the service. And she just, we don't know what she's saying, but, I always joke, oh, she's saying amen, obviously. But when I would preach, she would wait. She would go through the song service, be perfectly fine. And I would get up to preach and I would start talking and she would just start wailing. And so we went to this other church and they weren't used to that. I got used to it. I preached through it and it was fine. I loved it. It was great. I got more feedback from Sophie than most other people.
Right.
But
Right.
so it was terrific, and I just learned to just preach through it.
Yeah. Right.
But we went to this other church. They were not expecting this.
Right.
And so we walk in, and she's just, as Jim, the pastor, a good friend of mine, steps up there, starts preaching. She just starts going off almost the whole service. And so what we did to adjust, because obviously we're in another church's service, and we didn't want to be a disruption in that situation. My wife ended up taking over kind of the buddy system, which you're talking about, Derek.
Mm-hmm,
My
mm-hmm.
wife took over, and this little girl, she's in a wheelchair. She can't, she can't converse. She can't walk on her own. She has to be carried or wheeled around. And my wife would take her out to the hallway. If she started shouting out, she would say, "Okay, Sophie, let's go for a walk." And she would take her for a walk. They had security around. It's a bigger church than ours, so they had security around. So she would, I think, sometimes take her outside, and talk to the security guys or what have you. And that worked very well. And then she would, once she settled down, she'd bring her back in, and she'd be fine for a little while, and she'd start doing it again. My wife would take her out. So there are ways of not just dealing with special needs children, but even integrating them into the church in a situation like that, where she still got to be part of the church service. She still got to hear the gospel preached, and which Jim does very well. And I'm sure that was a blessing to her mother to see that somebody jumped in, so that her mother could sit there in the service and listen. And my wife was good with taking Sophie out for a walk. So there are ways of dealing with that without just saying, "Oh, we don't want your kid in the church," which unfortunately sometimes people react wrongly in those situations, and they can't deal with it. So the best way to deal with it is get rid of the problem rather than dealing with the problem, which is not actually a problem. There are definitely special needs, as the name implies. But anyway, I wanted to give you guys a chance to just kind of close us out here. What would be any parting advice that you would have to, I'm obviously a pastor, any pastors out there, people who are in charge of church ministries, if you had one last little piece of advice to give to us, what would that be? Just, if you don't have anything, that's okay. But this is your chance to be able to just kind of fill in the blanks here. Derek, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think Preston's already kind of touched on it a little bit. Probably the advice I would give to pastors' congregations regarding special needs, beyond what I've already said, is you just have to be willing to be inconvenienced. That's the bottom line. And I'm not talking about allowing for constant disruptions in in these kinds of things where you can't have a service. That's not what I'm talking about. But, we have the gentleman who's in the wheelchair, he'll make a joyful noise to the Lord throughout the service. And that can become distracting. And sometimes we have to wheel him out. And we do, if it's too much. But sometimes you just let it fly, because it's like, because what's the problem here? Just don't, get over yourself kind of thing. And so I think people have to be willing to not have everything prim and perfect all the time, and to be able to willingly accept these people who have special needs, because people accept us. And I mean, man, I got annoying traits too. So there you have it. And so I think that's a big part of it. We want order. That Scripture would tell us that there needs to be order and there needs to be organization. That's fine. But also when it comes to service, when it comes to accommodating, we have to be willing to be inconvenienced, and that'll go a long way. So that would be kind of my parting beyond what I've said already.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Preston, your parting advice regarding special needs children.
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about the inconvenience, and Derek did a great job of that. So I'll leave inconvenience alone, because I've talked about it enough where I'm at. So I would just simply depart by saying, and I've said this to people, it's been a little shocking to them, but when I talk about the resurrection, I tell people often, I says, in the resurrection, I will become more like Phoebe rather than Phoebe become more like me, because I think I am far more fallen than she is. And I just hide it better. I have better skills and strength to hide my fallenness. And so I just think in the resurrection, I will become far more dependent upon God's goodness and grace. I will become far more full of joy and happiness, like Phoebe is. I will become more thankful for the simple things, like she is, like chicken and French fries. I just see so much of the resurrection in her disability than I do in my ability, and I'm not ashamed to tell people I will become more like her,
Hmm. Hmm. All right.
and I will finally be glad. I will finally be in a happy state,
Hmm.
whereas I have to work way too hard now to be happy,
Yeah.
and she doesn't.
Yeah.
She just wakes up happy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And both of you gentlemen, thank you for taking some time out today to be with us. And if you wouldn't mind sticking around just for a second after we close all of this out and just talk with you real quickly, and I won't take too much time, but we'll make it quick. But if you could just stick around after the live stream, that would be terrific. All right, so let me go ahead and just say thank you to all of those who have been so faithful to stick with us throughout this hour. We do appreciate the fact that you took time out of your day to be with us here on Firebrand Pastors. And so we are praying for you. We love you, and we'll see you next week.